"Look at it," Lady Drusilla Cleves said, loud enough for half the ballroom to turn. "The little cinder girl has come to court after all." Rowan Ashgrove, 6th Duke of Emberley, set down his glass without drinking from it. He had been in the Marchioness of Sedgley's ballroom for 11 minutes, and in that time he had refused 2 introductions, declined 1 card game, and calculated with cold precision how soon he might leave without giving offence. Now he found he did not wish to leave at all. He wished to know why a woman in a grey stuff gown was standing alone at the foot of the great staircase while 300 people laughed. She was not weeping. That was the first thing he noticed. A woman shamed in public almost always wept or fled, or arranged her face into that brittle brightness that fooled nobody. This one did none of it. She stood with her hands loose at her sides and her chin level, and she looked out over the sea of silk and diamonds as though she were counting the chandelier's candles and finding them well arranged. Her gown was the colour of ash. It had been washed so often the weave had gone soft and thin at the elbows, and someone had mended the hem with thread that did not match. Around her, women floated in rose and amber and celestial blue, in tulle and Brussels lace, feathers nodding, jewels catching fire from the candlelight. She wore no jewels. She wore no gloves, and her hands, he saw, were reddened at the knuckles, the hands of a woman who had scrubbed a grate that morning. "Who is she?" he asked. Lord Petherton, who had attached himself to the Duke's elbow like a barnacle, followed his gaze and gave a comfortable chuckle. "That Honora Cleve, old Sir Marcus Cleve's daughter by his first wife. He died, 6 years back, 7, and the widow's had the running of Thornlea ever since. There's a story that the girl's little better than a servant in her own father's house, though I never credit gossip." He sipped. Evidently the stepmother thought a lesson in humility was due tonight. Evidently the stepmother thought a great deal of herself, Rowan said, and very little of anyone else. Petherton laughed as though it had been a joke. It had not been a joke. Across the room, Lady Drusilla was arranging her own 2 daughters like porcelain on a mantel, Ottoline in apricot satin, Prudence in white with silver spangles, both of them handsome enough, and both of them pointed like weapons in the direction of every title in the room. Lady Drusilla herself was in purple, and her purple made a great deal of noise. My dear Honora insisted on coming, she was saying to the little knot of matrons around her, in a voice pitched to carry to the orchestra. I told her, I said, "My love, you have nothing fit to wear, and no accomplishments to speak of, and the world is unkind to a plain girl with no fortune." But she would come. So here she is. One cannot lock a girl in the attic, can one? A ripple of laughter. Though I confess there have been evenings I've been tempted. Rowan watched Honora clear every word of it. He watched her not flinch. Then he watched her turn her head quite slowly and look directly at him. It was not a look of appeal. That was what undid him. 9 women in 10, caught in humiliation with a duke's eyes upon them, would have sent him a mute plea. "Pity me, notice me, save me." She sent him nothing of the kind. She looked at him the way one looks at a stranger across a street, a moment of mild human acknowledgement, and then away, to the candles again, and to whatever it was she was counting. Rowan Ashgrove had spent 38 years being wanted for what he owned. He had inherited at 19, buried a brother at 24, and hardened at some point between the two into a man they called the Winter Duke behind their fans. He had been hunted by mothers, flattered by fathers, and offered daughters like horseflesh at a fair for the better part of 2 decades, and he had grown so accustomed to being looked at hungrily that a look with no hunger in it struck him like cold water in the face. "Petherton," he said. "Present me." Petherton choked slightly on his wine. "2 to Lady Drusilla? Your Grace, she'll have you engaged to one of those girls before the supper dance. To Miss Cleve." There was a pause of some seconds during which Rowan could hear Petherton's mind labouring like a mill in a poor wind. "Your Grace, forgive me, but the girl is dressed as a scullion, in front of the whole of the county. If you go near her, they will say a great many things," Rowan agreed. "They generally do." "Present me or stand aside, and I shall do it myself, which will be a good deal more interesting for everybody." Petherton presented him. The walk across that ballroom floor took perhaps 20 seconds. Rowan was aware, with the dispassionate part of his mind, of the sound going out of the room ahead of him like a tide drawing back from a beach. The orchestra played on. Everything else stopped. He saw Lady Drusilla's head turn, saw her smile begin, saw her put a hand upon Ottoline's arm and push her half a step forward, quite certain he could read it in her face as plainly as print, quite certain that the Duke of Emberley was crossing the room toward her daughters, because where else in the world could a duke possibly be going? He walked past them without turning his head. Honora Cleeve did not move as he approached. She simply watched him come, with an expression he could only call careful, as though she suspected some new species of cruelty and was preparing to bear it well. "Miss Cleeve," Petherton said, sweating audibly, "may I present His Grace the Duke of Emberley? Your Grace, Miss Honora Cleeve of Thornleigh." She curtsied. It was a very good curtsy, better than any he had received that evening, and hurried exactly deep enough, with none of the fluttering coquetry that made him want to leave the country. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was low and even. Up close he saw that her eyes were grey and extraordinarily steady, and that there was a smudge of soot she had missed at the very edge of her jaw, and that she was perhaps 25 and quite beautiful in a way the room was too stupid to see. "Miss Cleeve," he said, "will you dance with me?" Somewhere behind him a woman said, "Oh," in a strangled sort of way. Honora Cleeve looked at him for a long moment, and then this was the second thing that undid him. She said, "Why? I beg your pardon?" "Why, Your Grace," she repeated without heat, without archness. "You have been in this room a quarter of an hour and every eye in it has followed you. You have refused, by my count, 4 introductions, and now you cross the whole floor to ask the poorest-dressed woman present to stand up with you." Her chin came up half an inch. "I have been laughed at once already tonight. I should like to know, before I take your arm, whether I am about to be laughed at twice." The silence around them was now nearly complete. Rowan Ashgrove discovered that he was, for the first time in some years, entirely delighted. "Miss Cleeve," he said, "in 18 years of being pursued through ballrooms, no one has ever asked me why. They have asked me for a great many things, never that." He held out his hand. "The honest answer is that I came across this room because you did not want me to. And the more honest answer is that I have watched you stand in a gown they meant as a punishment, with 300 people laughing, and not bow your head by so much as an inch. And I find I would rather dance with a woman with a straight back than with all the diamonds in this county. That is the whole of my reason. You may accept it or refuse it, but you will not be laughed at. Not while my hand is on yours." He watched something move behind those grey eyes. Not triumph, something more like grief being carefully set down. She put her hand in his. Her fingers were cold and roughened, and they trembled once, very slightly, and then were steady. The orchestra, which had been sawing its way through the end of a set, faltered as the Duke of Emberley led a woman in a mended grey gown into the very centre of the floor, and the couples there melted back from them like frost from a window, and the whole glittering room stood and stared. Rowan turned to face her and bowed, and did not look at anyone else. "They are all watching," she said under her breath. "They are," he agreed. "How fortunate. It saves me telling them individually." Her mouth twitched. It was the first crack in the composure, and it was worth more to him than the dance. "Telling them what, Your Grace?" The music began. "Whatever they need to be told," said Rowan Ashgrove, and led her into the first figure. She danced well. Of course she danced well. Someone long ago had taught this girl in the years before the grey gown, and her body remembered even if her hands had forgotten. She was light and exact, and she did not chatter. And when the figures brought them together, his hand found her waist, and he was aware of the thinness of the stuff under his palm and of the fact that she was cold, that she had come to a February ball in a gown with no warmth in it at all, and something in his chest went very hard and very quiet. "You are shivering," he said. "It is a large room. It is not a large room, it is a badly heated one, and you are dressed for a laundry." The figure turned them apart and turned them back. "Tell me about the gown." "There is nothing to tell, Miss Cleeve." He caught her eye and held it. "I have spent a great deal of my life listening to people tell me nothing. You will find I am very hard to bore and impossible to deceive, and I am asking you a plain question. Where are your clothes?" She was quiet through half a figure. "Sold," she said at last, quite calmly. "My mother's things were sold 2 winters ago. The blue silk I was to wear tonight mislaid this afternoon. My stepmother was distressed about it. She said there was nothing for it but the grey, and that I might stay at home if I was ashamed. A pause. I was not ashamed, so I came. Rowan turned her under his arm and brought her back, and over her shoulder he saw Lady Drusilla Cleeve's purple silk trembling with a rage she did not yet dare to show, and he thought, with perfect clarity and no particular passion, that he was going to take that woman's world apart brick by brick. "Miss Cleeve," he said, "do you know what they call me?" "The Winter Duke," she said promptly. "They say you have never smiled in company, that you refused the king's own cousin, and that your heart is a bank vault with the key thrown into the sea. And do you believe it?" Honora Cleeve looked up at him, and she smiled a small, wry, entirely unafraid smile, and said, "I believe, your grace, that a bank vault is only a room. It is what people put in it that signifies." The music ended. Rowan did not let go of her hand. He did not let go of her hand, and the room understood, some moments before Rowan himself said a word, that something irrevocable was happening in the middle of the Marchioness of Sedgley's ballroom. Lady Drusilla came at them like a ship under full sail. "Your Grace," she cried, and her voice had been remade entirely, all the honeyed warmth of a woman who has never in her life said an unkind word. "How very good, how very like you, to show such condescension to my poor stepdaughter. She is a dear, dutiful creature, though quite hopeless in company. You must not mind her strange manners. She has had no advantages, none at all." "Madame," Rowan said, "I have not yet had the pleasure." The pause that followed was exquisite. Your Grace, I am Lady Cleeve, Lady Drusilla Cleeve of Thornlea." She produced a curtsy, and the two daughters produced curtsies behind her, apricot and silver, sinking like flowers in a frost. "These are my daughters, Miss Ottoline Cleeve and Miss Prudence Cleeve, Lady Cleeve." He inclined his head precisely 1 inch. "I have been admiring Miss Cleeve's gown." Nobody spoke. Somewhere near the windows, a fan snapped shut. Her gown, your Grace." Lady Drusilla's laugh came out with a crack in it. "You are pleased to be droll. The poor girl has nothing fit." "I am never droll. I am told it is one of my worst qualities." Rowan looked, without hurry, at the mended hem, at the thin worn elbows, at the raw hands he was holding. Then he looked up. "It is the only honest gown in the room, madam. Every other woman here has spent £100 telling me what she wishes me to think of her. Miss Cleeve has spent nothing at all, and told me a great deal more." He let the silence sit for 1 heartbeat, about herself, and, as it happens, about you. Lady Drusilla's face went the colour of tallow. "Your Grace mistakes. I very rarely do." He turned deliberately away from her, as one turns from a draught, and addressed the room at large in the flat, carrying voice he used in the Lords, the one that had ended 3 debates and 1 man's career. "My lords, ladies, you will forgive an unfashionable man an unfashionable speech. I have been coming to rooms like this one for 18 years, and I have been bored in every one of them. Tonight I have been shown something rarer than beauty, and a great deal rarer than money. I have been shown courage, the small, unglamorous, entirely thankless kind, that stands still in a doorway and does not weep while 300 of its neighbours laugh." He felt Honora's hand jerk in his. He tightened his fingers. "You laughed," he said. "I did not." "Miss Cleeve, will you look at me?" She looked at him. Her eyes were bright and furious and terrified all at once. "Do not," she whispered. "Your Grace, do not do this out of pity. I could bear the whole of tonight. I could not bear that." "Pity," said Rowan Ashgrove, "is what one feels for the weak. I have not the smallest particle of it for you." He turned her hand over in his, quite gently, and looked at the reddened knuckles, and then he did a thing that was talked of in that county for 40 years. He bowed his head and pressed his mouth to the back of her hand, in front of everyone, as though she had been a queen. Then he straightened. "Miss Cleeve," he said, "I am 38 years old. I am reputed to be cold, and I dare say I am. I have refused every woman who was ever paraded before me, and I have never in my life said what I am about to say. I do not know you. I know only that in 15 minutes you have asked me a question no one has dared ask me, told me a truth no one has troubled to tell me, and stood in a punishment gown with more dignity than this room could muster between it. That is not nothing. In my experience it is very nearly everything, a breath. I am asking for your hand, tonight, before all of them, so that no one may ever say it was done in a corner or repented of in the morning." Honora Cleeve stood absolutely still. You are mad, she said. I am told so, frequently. You do not know what I am. I keep the books at Thornley, your grace, and I lay the fires, and I turn the sheets, and there are days I have not spoken aloud to another living soul until the lamps are lit. I have no fortune. I have no connections. I have not danced in 6 years until tonight. You have not forgotten how. And if I say yes to you, she went on, and now her voice did shake, and you wake tomorrow and remember that you are a duke and that I am a woman in a mended gown, it will not be a disappointment to me. It will be a bereavement. Do you understand that? I have been left before. My father left me to her. I would rather stay as I am forever in the ash and the grey than be lifted up and dropped. The whole room heard it. He would think of that afterwards, that she had said the truest thing of her life in front of 300 people and had not cared, because she was speaking only to him. Honora Cleeve, said Rowan Ashgrove, listen to me. I will not press you for an answer tonight, because you are right. You do not know me, and a woman who has been used as you have been used is entitled to be slow to trust. He drew a ring from his smallest finger, the old signet red gold, worn thin at the shoulders, the Emberley crest half rubbed away by 300 years of hands. This was my mother's before it was mine, and her mother's before that. Take it, not as a promise you must keep, as a promise I have made. Keep it a week, keep it a year. If at the end of it you send it back to me, I will not ask you why, and I will trouble you no more. But while it is on your hand, no one in England may say one careless word of you without answering to me. He put the ring into her palm and closed her fingers over it. And that, he added, quite pleasantly, turning at last to Lady Drusilla, includes you, madam. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Lady Drusilla Cleeve had gone entirely grey, and Ottoline had begun to cry, and Prudence was staring at her stepsister with an expression that was not, Rowan noted with interest, entirely unfriendly. Your Grace, Lady Drusilla managed. There has been a misunderstanding. The gown was an accident. The blue silk was mislaid. I was distraught. Was it? Said Rowan. How very careless of the servants. I shall send my own man to Thornley in the morning to help you look for it. He is remarkably good at finding things, chiefly in his experience in the boxes of the person who mislaid them. He smiled. It was not a warm smile, and everyone who saw it agreed afterwards that it had been the worst moment of the evening, until morning. Lady Cleeve. He offered Honora his arm. Miss Cleeve, supper is in the long gallery. I am told the Marchioness's lobster patties are worth the journey, and I have no intention of eating them alone. And the Duke of Emberley walked out of that ballroom with a woman in a grey stuff gown on his arm, past the apricot and the silver and the purple, past every mother in the county, and 300 people parted before them like water before a hull. He took her home himself in his own carriage at 1 in the morning, with his own greatcoat about her shoulders because she was still shivering, and he found he could not endure it. Thornley stood black against the sky at the end of a drive that had not been gravelled in a decade. Rowan looked at the sagging gutters and the boarded window over the porch and said nothing and filed it away and handed her down. Your Grace. She had the ring closed in her fist. She had not put it on. Why did you truly do it? The moon was up. She stood in the cold with his coat swallowing her, and she looked so tired that he wanted, absurdly, to pick her up and carry her somewhere warm and stand guard over the door. Because I have been asleep for 18 years, said Rowan, and tonight, when you asked me why, I woke. He came the next morning as he had promised, and he brought his man of business, and by noon a good many things at Thornley had come to light. The blue silk, for instance, was found in a trunk in Lady Drusilla's dressing-room, along with a sapphire cross that had belonged to the First Lady Cleeve, and a pearl set entered in the household inventory of 1806. The household accounts, which Honora kept in a small clear hand, showed a house running on £90 a year, while 1,100 went out in dressmakers' bills for 2 young ladies who were not, Rowan's man noted drily, the owner of the estate. For Thornley was Honora's. That was the thing they had all been careful never to say aloud in her hearing. Sir Marcus Cleeve had left the estate to his daughter absolutely, with his widow as trustee only until Honora came of age, and Honora had come of age 4 years since, and had never been told, and had gone on laying the fires in her own house while the woman who held it in trust spent her money on satin. Rowan read the deed twice, then he set it down very carefully, because his hands were not entirely steady, and went to find her. He found her in the still room, sleeves rolled, elbow deep in a basin, and she looked up and read his face in a second. "How bad?" she said. "You are not the poor relation, Honora." It was the first time he had used her name, and neither of them remarked it. "You are the owner of this house. You have been since you were 21. She has known it every day and let you scrub your own floors." Honora Cleeve stood very still with the water running off her wrists. Then she sat down, rather suddenly, on a stool by the window, and she did not weep, and Rowan Ashgrove knelt down on the flagstones of a still room in his London coat, and took both her wet hands in his and held them until she could breathe. "Turn her out," Rowan said that afternoon in the library with the deed on the table between them. "Say the word and it is done before dinner. She has no right to a stick of this furniture and no claim on you whatever. My carriage is at the door. She may take her daughters and go to her brother in Bath and be grateful I have not laid the matter before a magistrate, which, Honora, I could. Concealment of a settlement is not a peccadillo, it is a crime." Honora Cleeve stood at the window with her back to him, looking out at the ruined lawn. "You would enjoy that," she said. "I would enjoy it enormously." "Yes," she turned round. "That is what frightens me of you, your Grace." Rowan Ashgrove had been called cold, hard, unforgiving, and once in print, a stone with a coronet on it. No one had ever told him to his face that his anger was frightening because it was for somebody. He found he had nothing at all to say. "I have been cold in this house for 6 years, Honora said. "Cold in my hands and cold in my heart, and there were nights I lay awake making up speeches. The speech I would give her when the day came, and it was a very fine speech, and there was not one kind word in it. She came and put her fingertips on the deed. And now the day is come, and I find I do not want to give it. I do not want to be like her. I have watched what she is for 6 years, and it is a small, cold, hungry thing, and I will not carry it out of this room with me. Then what do you want?" She thought about it, seriously, the way she seemed to do everything. "She goes," she said. "The house is mine and she has forfeited it, and I will not have her at my table, and I will not pretend. But she goes with 100 a year, paid quarterly, so that she is not on the parish and cannot say I made a beggar of her. And Prudence stays if Prudence wishes." She looked up. "Prudence brought me bread in the attic, your Grace. In February, 3 years ago, when I had been shut in for spoiling a bonnet. She was 15, she was beaten for it. She never told me and I never told her I knew, and she has not once looked at me in 6 years without shame in her face, and shame is not cruelty. It is what is left when cruelty has been done to you as well." Rowan looked at her for a long moment. "You are a great deal better than I am," he said. "No, I am a great deal more tired." A small crooked smile. "Mercy is cheaper than hatred, your Grace. I have kept the books here for 6 years. I know what things cost. They sent for Lady Drusilla. She came in prepared for battle and found instead a quiet young woman standing by the fire with a deed in her hand, and a duke by the window who did not trouble to look at her at all." Rowan let Honora speak. "It was the hardest thing he did that year. Thornley is mine," Honora said. "It has been mine these 4 years, and you knew, and you let me black the grates in my mother's morning room. I shall not go to law about it. Not because you deserve mercy, you do not, but because I intend to be able to live with myself, which is a thing you gave up some while ago and have never missed." She laid the deed on the mantel. "You will leave this house by Friday. You will take nothing that is not entered in your own name. There will be £100 a year for you at Coutts, paid quarterly, so long as I never hear that you have spoken of me, or of my mother, or of this house to anyone at all. Break that, and his Grace will do as he likes with you, and I will not lift a finger to stop him. Do you understand me?" Lady Drusilla Cleeve looked at her stepdaughter, and something in her face came apart. She had spent 6 years making certain this girl was nothing, and she was standing now in the wreck of the only thing she had ever been good at. "You will regret this," she said, "with the last of it. He will tire of you. Men like that tire." "Madam," said Rowan from the window, without turning round the door. She went. Ottoline went with her, weeping and complaining, and neither of them looked back. But Prudence Cleeve did not go. Prudence Cleeve stood in the hall in her travelling cloak with her box at her feet and her face working, and Honora came out and looked at her, and after a moment Honora opened her arms. And the girl in the silver-spangled ball gown of the night before dropped her head onto her stepsister's shoulder and cried as though something had been let out of her at last. Rowan stood in the library doorway and watched, and did not go to them, and thought that he had spent his whole life mistaking hardness for strength. He courted her through the spring properly, the way she deserved and the way nobody had ever troubled to do. He did not send jewels. He sent first a load of seasoned oak, because the wood at Thornley was empty and she had been burning green wood that smoked. He sent a glazier for the boarded window. He sent 100 weight of coal and a pair of good wool blankets and pretended he had ordered them by mistake, and she wrote back, in her small clear hand, "Your Grace is the least convincing liar in England, and the fires are lit, and thank you." He came on Tuesdays, then on Tuesdays and Fridays. Then, by April, on most days that God sent, riding the 11 miles from Emberley with the dust on his boots, and he sat in the still room while she made cordials, and he told her things he had never told anyone, about his brother and the hunting accident, and the 19 years he had spent being certain it had been his fault, about the great cold rooms of Emberley Hall and the way his footsteps sounded in them, about the girl who had been offered to him at 23 and how he had heard her, through a door, describing to her friends exactly how much his income was worth per annum, and how little she cared for the rest of him, and that, Honora said, is when the vault was locked. That is when the vault was locked. She wiped her hands and came and stood in front of him, and put her palm flat against his chest, over the heart, quite calmly, as though she were laying claim. "There is nothing in it that frightens me," she said. Rowan Ashgrove put his hand over hers and held it there and could not for some moments speak at all. They were married in June at the little church at Thornley and not at St. George's, because she wanted the village at her wedding and he wanted whatever she wanted. She wore ivory silk. She wore the sapphire cross that had been her mother's, recovered from a trunk in Bath. She wore the old red gold signet on a chain at her throat, because it was too big for her hand and she would not have it altered. Half the county came. They came to see the Winter Duke marry the girl in the grey gown, and they stayed to see something none of them had expected, which was the Duke of Emberley in the porch in the sun, turning to look at his bride and losing, visibly, ruinously, in front of everybody, every particle of his famous composure. "You are smiling, Your Grace," Honora said, taking his arm. "They will not know what to do." "Let them wander," said Rowan. He took her to Emberley that evening. The great cold rooms were not cold. He had had every fire in the house lit since morning, 41 of them, and the servants lined the hall, and the smell of wood smoke and beeswax went up the stairs like a welcome. She stopped in the middle of the marble floor and looked around her, and he watched her face, and waited, and found that his own heart was going like a boy's. "It is very large," she said at last. "It is. There is a good deal of it to keep warm." "There is." He came and stood behind her and put his hands on her shoulders. "Honora, there has been nobody in this house for 19 years. There have been servants and dust sheets and a man walking about in it at night. Not a soul. I did not know what it wanted until a woman in a mended gown asked me why I'd crossed a ballroom." He turned her round. "It wanted you. So did I, so do I. Every day of my life, until the last one." She reached up and touched his face, the way she had touched his chest in the still room, calmly, laying claim. "Then no more attics," she said, "and no more vaults and no more grey. Take me upstairs, Rowan." He carried her up. The candles burned low in the long gallery and the fires whispered in 41 grates, and the great house at last was quiet in the way that houses are quiet when someone is loved in them. They said afterwards, in that county, that the Duke of Emberley had gone mad in a ballroom and married a servant. They said it for about 18 months. Then they stopped saying it. Chiefly because the new Duchess of Emberley restored the school at Thornley and mended the poorhouse roof, and could tell you to a farthing what a family of 5 needed in a hard winter, having once been a family of 1 in a hard winter herself. And chiefly because it became very tiresome to be the last person in the room still sneering at a woman the whole village would have died for. Lady Drusilla Cleeve lived out her days in Bath on 100 a year, and kept her tongue, and was not spoken of, and on winter evenings at Emberley, When the wind came off the hills and the fires were banked and the great house creaked around them, Rowan Ashgrove would look up from his book and find his wife opposite him with her feet tucked under her and the firelight in her hair. And he would put out his hand across the space between the chairs, and she would take it without looking up from her page, the way one takes something that has always been there. "You are staring, Your Grace," she would say. "I am. Why?" And every single time, for 40 years, he gave her the same answer, and every time she smiled at her book and did not raise her eyes, because she already knew it. "Because you asked me why," he said.